Okay, so these are things that people could do, that they know how to do. So sometimes people believe the impossible task is like this thing that's really easy for me, so why can't you do it too? But if you've never been taught, then it's not a thing you can do, right? So there is an element of, if you've already been taught and you've already learned, and you can't do it, then we're hitting an impossible task, rather than something that just is a new skill that you need to learn, right? So they're really simple things that when you look at them, you're like, why can't I do that? They can get as complicated as people are like, I stopped being able to brush my teeth, right? Or I no longer can get my car in for service. I'm way overdue. I'm waiting for my car to break down because I haven't had an oil change in, I think someone said 3 years. In others, okay? So oftentimes we see it in other people. So it has to be that this person that you're seeing the impossible task manifest in actually wants to do it. Okay, so sometimes we see things that people aren't doing and we go, it's so easy, why aren't you doing this? How come you can't do this? You're old enough, you've done it before. And sometimes it's easier to believe that someone is struggling with it than to just say to ourselves, it doesn't matter to them like it matters to me. It's when we hear the person say, I want to and I just can't, that's the invitation for helping. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of a helping situation where you've got a family member and you're like, they just don't do this, why? If they want to do it and they still can't, you've got a problem. Okay, so the problem could be any number of things, but a key factor is it's the motivation complex has some sort of issue in it. Okay, so we've got internal physiology, so that's mental health diagnoses, that's nutrition, that's hormones related to stress, related to phase of life, related to any sort of biological impact. We've got environmental conditions, safety, that's a huge one, an impossible task. If we don't have enough safety, there's going to be all sorts of things that we can't do. Environmental conditions can also be like with this summer, depending on how hot the day is, there are going to be different impossible tasks that come up with the heat. There's going to be different impossible tasks that come up with the cold. There's going to be different ones with the different seasons, right? Past history and experiences. So those ones look like if you have something in the past that stopped you from a task. So let's say you have stuff around maybe a workplace issue that was really rough on you, and it had some stuff connected to email, and suddenly email is your impossible task. That's our past experience, kind of hitting that motivation where email has become a threat, right? So the last one is evaluation and coding. This is where having time to process, having enough of our prefrontal cortex engaged, so if we're in fight and flight, we can't process the same way. So prefrontal cortex is in charge of emotion regulation, identifying things by name, planning, consequence evaluation, all that kind of stuff. So if you can't evaluate your consequences, you're not going to do well at picking the right thing to be motivated on. The other thing that falls in here is learning disabilities. Okay, so ADHD, although it's a mental health diagnosis, it's also a processing disorder, right? Any of our learning disabilities go into there. Okay, some of our brain injury stuff, so fetal alcohol syndrome, also is going to have a problem with evaluation and coding. Okay, so motivation is going to be a problem, but not for the same reasons. So for example, internal physiology, let's say you have schizophrenia. So you take medication for your schizophrenia, sometimes the after effect is that your motivation goes down because of the medication you have to take. But also your motivation goes down because you can't evaluate things properly anymore because the schizophrenia can impact your ability to evaluate consequence. Now if you have depression, you take medication for the depression, boost your motivation, but when you struggle with motivation, you're still able to evaluate all the consequences. You just can't get that oomph to get up and go. The simplest format of how motivation works that I could find for us. So the idea is depending on what kind of thing, so sex seems to be the exception, that the motivation is a little bit different. But there's like one kind of cost-benefit calculation, but it takes in all the three aspects and kind of evaluates it and pulls it down. So if there is any problem here, it may outweigh the cost benefits. then it affects our drive to go after a goal. So there are some goals that are habit and some goals that are like direction oriented, where we've made a full decision. So goals that are habits tend to be easier because they're body memory. So the cost benefits, you're not actually evaluating because you already have. Does that make sense? So it's like you're coasting on your momentum with habit. So once the habit is broken, if you have any evaluation and encoding stuff, it actually is harder for you to get back to the habit than it is for some of the other brains that are out there. So this is in particular really important for people with ADHD, people with OCD, people with anxiety disorders. Once the habit is gone, the cost benefit isn't as easy because you're fluctuating with how your day and your function is going. Okay? Some learning disabilities are really good with kind of pushing this back in to habit so that the decision is easy, but might need more support. So autism spectrum, cost benefit can be very easy. Starting a habit, really easy, but getting the support of moving away from the feeling of overwhelm so that you can actually look at these things can be difficult. Making the impossible easier. What it looks like, the very first thing we need to do is we need to reduce shame, because actually if we have one impossible task, there's probably more than one. We just haven't admit to ourselves and other people that there's more than one. Because it really is, by the time we notice something that we're talking to someone else about, there are some smaller things that we didn't notice we were. Understanding the obstacles. This is really tricky. We are very bad at really putting ourselves in the shoes of other people. So I might go, oh yeah, I understand why mail is hard for you to open. Yep. You know, you don't know what's coming, or it's always bills, or whatever, and the person goes, like, no, that's not it. So sometimes the obstacle might be sensory. I don't like the sound that mail makes. I don't like the feeling of ripping paper. I don't like the stack. I don't like the garbage. Opening a letter, I have to rip it. I have to open it. I have to take it out. I have to read it. I have to decide what to do with it. I have to throw what's left in the garbage. Then I have to go back to this and figure out, what do I do now? And it becomes a to-do list. So there's too many steps, and I can't break down the steps. And so I just don't. And that's just one letter, right? So another obstacle could be, you know, I grab the mail at this time of day, I throw it on the counter, I forgot where I put it because I'm going on to the next thing in my day and I'm too rushed, and then I never open the mail. And then I see this big stack that I put 2 weeks ago and I go, well, I don't want to open it now because I don't want to know what I missed. Right? And those are very different obstacles. Or I never went and picked up the mail because I don't leave the house anymore. Right? All very, very different obstacles pointing to different parts of motivation. Some of them are emotional, some of them are behavioral, some of them are like processing, which is physiological and behavioral complement. So the best thing we can do is find some similar tasks that are still easy. So when we start showing people where they're being successful, we're reinforcing the idea of I can rather than I can't. Because all of these impossible tasks say I can't. Can't, and it should be easy, and if I just did this, then I could just do the next thing. So we want to find, what are you still doing that could be hard for somebody else, right? Because any number of things, going for a walk, that could be hard for someone, right? Answering the phone, that could be hard for someone. Sending a text message, that could be hard. So we find all the things that they're still able to do, and we find the ones that are similar, that are easy. So we can figure out, what about those things don't have the same obstacles? So if I can do all the parts that are the same of that task up until I hit the obstacle, then I may have done this impossible task halfway. Or I may have done 3 steps into it. And so if I've gone 3 steps into it, I've now bolstered my confidence. And I focus on what I've completed rather than what's left. We can also anchor tasks that are similar together. So if I have a habit that I'm still able to do, and I do that thing, and while I'm still in that state of momentum, I pick up the impossible impossible task, I am far more likely to go all the way to the finish. But if I'm already stopped and I think about the impossible task, I'm going to find everything but that thing to do, right? Because it's harder. So we also make sure people are only doing one impossible task at a time, and some of our impossible tasks are actually multiple tasks. So really breaking down the problem is a good way to do it. So often people are like, but it's just the dishes. And I go, no, it's not just the dishes. How about you just do only plates? And they look at me and go, but that's not the dishes. And I'm like, but would you have a clean plate? And they go, oh, right. I could clean my plates. Plates are easy. Or they might say to me, no, plates are the worst. I could do my glasses. And I go, then let's do all the glasses. Now that all the glasses are done, how do you feel? And they go, good. And I go, so how many dishes do you need for the next time you eat? This many. Can you do that many? I could do that many. What one are you doing last? Do the last one. You're either going to make it the hardest one that you don't want to do, or you're going to make it the easiest one. And we organize by what the brain wants. So some brains like to get at the hardest task first, because then it's done. And they go, oh, over, done. Whereas other brains like to work their way up to difficulty, where they go, I did that. That was good. That wasn't so hard. I'll go the next step. And I did that. Okay. This one's just a little harder than the last one, and now I'm done. So we have to kind of organize how the brain wants it, and each brain wants it differently, right? So some people like to go in a binge, great. Other people really need to pace themselves out. So knowing those obstacles fits in each one of those categories. Because if you don't understand what you're really working with, you're going to set up a situation that's going to be successful for one brain and not the other. This is the current version of the cognitive behavior therapy model. It used to be that body sensations weren't included, but it turned out that we discovered that body sensations are a really important contributor to the other parts of that model. So when it says situation, that means specific situation. The more specific the situation, the better we are at getting results when we make a change. So you can change anything. You can go after a problem with thoughts, behaviors, body sensations, or emotions, and there's no specific order. The impossible task often starts with behaviors, that we try and get the habits going to try and bolster success, so that we have better emotions about ourselves, and then the thoughts are more accessible. When depression is really severe, we go after the thoughts through different behaviors. So we look at, rather than what makes you feel good, what is satisfaction? What feels complete? So it's a little bit of a different spin on the impossible task, but looking for, rather than don't you feel good, does this feel complete? Because that is a pleasant feeling, we just don't always label it as such, right? Depression is really hard to reach pleasant. So a nice neutral is what you're looking for, okay? Body sensations. This is really good for kids, because they're often bodies first. This is really good for people who are anxious. This is really good for ADHD. So what we do is we set up a situation where the body is feeling very good and very relaxed. So we fix the temperature, we fix the lights. So are you hangry? Let's eat. Are you thirsty? Have a drink. Once the body is really taken care of, we can actually access a lot more motivation, because we've not got a person that's misinterpreting their signals. So anxiety is really easy to misinterpret. So I used to think I was afraid of libraries, turns out I'm allergic. Okay, racing heart rate, breathing fast, oh my gosh, I don't feel right, I think I'm afraid of libraries. Years. Took an antihistamine, and no longer afraid of libraries. Okay, so this is sort of that thing where we go, okay, body sensations, they actually do play a really important role. So when we take care of body sensations, we have more access to different behaviors. With emotions, that's like the fight and flight. Once we kick somebody into fight and flight, they're not going to think right anyway. It doesn't matter if we go after thoughts, it doesn't matter if we go after behavior, because what really is the main thing is safety. So if there's trauma, if there is a jump scare, if there is, any sort of history where something goes, oh, this is familiar, that's when the emotions are going to turn off that prefrontal cortex, and of course, we're not going to have the motivation we need for any of the tasks that we find unpleasant. Okay? So especially if the impossible task is connected to something that we associate with something really fearful or threatening, it won't be easy to do if our emotional state isn't in the right place. So if Erin is off on a leave from work, WSID is involved, and they stopped opening mail, chances are it's because they didn't want to see what letters they were getting from WSID for when they were getting cut off, right? And then mail becomes this thing, even the stuff that's not WSID, even that birthday card from that friend, you can't open it, okay? So this is just sort of some of the examples of how that can work. So this model can be really good at sort of you plug something in and you go, in this specific situation, what's our easiest way to start changing it? Sometimes it's just changing the situation, right? So you're used to walking to the mailbox by yourself. Guess what? Now you're walking to the mailbox with somebody else. And now you can get your mail. So we sometimes look for simple solutions and modifications. We like to use circle of security as our attachment model. So like I said before, the attachment model will help you understand what kind of support somebody else needs or what kind of support you need for your impossible tasks, okay? It really is looking at how does the relationship with somebody else help me find the needs that I'm looking for, right? So if I'm in a good relationship with someone and one of the things in their impossible task is a barrier because they don't like the sound of ripping paper, if we don't have a strong relationship, they're not going to want to tell me that's what it is, right? They'll find any other reason. And we'll fix them and they'll all be wrong and we still won't get to the task, right? Or if washing the dishes is the reason they don't want to do it is because they can't handle the feeling of bubbles, they're not going to tell me. That's embarrassing, right? So we don't ever look for the alternative ways to wash dishes. Okay? Also, if it's trauma, they might not know some of the things, and we might not talk about that story because it's too personal, and we never connect the dots. But there is that piece where when someone goes, oh my gosh, that's because of, we connected that. And they go, ah, I've been doing this for years, and it's really connected to when I was this old, over here. Or they go, oh my gosh, me not putting my stuff away is grief. I didn't know, right? But we can't get there without the relationship. Why? Because you shouldn't trust a stranger, right? If you don't believe I can keep your secrets, I don't deserve to get them, right? So that is why the relationship piece is really important, right? So we can figure out, what are we really looking for? Do we need someone to comfort us so that we feel strong enough to go out and do the thing we need to do? Are we having trouble understanding our feelings about this impossible task? What is it that the feeling is that's stopping us? Is it that we just need a body double watching over someone? It is amazing how just being in the room when someone has a task to do can keep them motivated. Especially with anyone ADHD, just someone's body is enough to keep them on task. You don't even have to do the same thing. You can drink wine, they'll clean their house. It's amazing. Okay? And then setting limits. Sometimes people need you to be there to keep them accountable because they're so used to eroding their own goals for themselves and giving themselves permission to not keep trying that being accountability partner is enough. Just to say, hey, I told you I'd check in, did you do it? How about now? Eventually they say, yes, I did it. I did it! Okay? So that relationship is actually significantly important. And if someone has impossible tasks and they don't have anybody around, it's really unfair to believe that they can change that impossible task without something. For success, first thing I evaluate when someone has an impossible task is what time of day you're trying to do it. There might be an easier time of day. So some people are like, I'm not showering, I'm not taking care of myself. And I go, did you try at night? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I go, but you're not rushed. You're not doing anything where you have to do the transition quickly. And they kind of go, oh, people wash at night? I go, yes. And that's still clean, right? So, part of it is looking at what cultural pieces are in the way. Or did you try washing yourself differently? Did you try leaning over the tub and washing your hair that way? Did you try using the cloth in the sink? It's better than nothing, right? So we look at, try different times, modify the task to have fewer obstacles. Sometimes stepping in and out of the bathtub can be hard, depending on what's going on for somebody, right? Sometimes the feeling of water around your feet in the shower, you can handle that. Sometimes there's bad memories with the bathroom. Lots of people have those. Okay? Breaking it down into smaller parts. Right? Sounds pretty self-explanatory. Linking it to other tasks that are easier. So we call that habit anchoring. So it can be a task that's similar, but I have had people have success where, so something like medication taking. It's a very common one. I always forget to take medication. What do? And we go, well, what thing do you never forget to do? And we anchor it to that thing. So sometimes it's feeding the cat. So you keep your medication near the stuff that you use to feed your cat. Sometimes it's getting into my pajamas. So put the medication with your pajamas. Sometimes it's brushing my teeth. So put the medication with your toothbrush. And they go, well, what if I have to eat? Well, then you have a snack with your cat. Or you have a snack right before you brush your teeth. Right? So we really remove those obstacles so that we can link it to the other habits that are already just stuck in that momentum. Right? And then we ask for help. So help looks like body doubles. Body doubles can even be done online. So I've had people that were just on a video call, and I'm doing my stuff, they're doing their stuff, and it gets done. 4 and 5 things that were on their list. Friend or family to complete it with, so just saying, hey, I need you to come and help me do this thing. Help me open my mail, help me organize it, help me do dishes. Counseling, okay? Some good counseling can often help people, and then the doctor or the nurse. Because if it's a medication issue, because we've got some physiological stuff that's in the way of motivation, medication might be a temporary or an ongoing thing to kind of get through that state. Obviously, sometimes the impossible task is connected to suicidal thinking, right? And that's when we need a little bit more help in that, so always crisis lines are open, but when you hear somebody with an impossible task, or if you have one yourself, make sure you're keeping a check on, are you suicidal? Is this connected to the fact that you don't believe life is worth living? Because that is a conversation that we sometimes don't notice because we're so busy saying, this is so easy. What's wrong with you? Why can't you just do this? Or we say that to ourselves, and we slowly build on those negative feelings.